Let me begin by saying that I appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys this evening and to be a part of this congregation. And of course, we don't really feel like visitors most of the time. We don't make it here very often. It seems like at least kind of comes and goes. And I think it's probably been a couple of months since we've been here, but nonetheless, it is always a blessing to be here with you and to be a part in the work that we then are able to share in. And of course, this congregation helps us in so many different ways, helps us with our monthly support, but also helps us with the financial needs that we have to take mission trips. And that's what this report obviously is about. Now, what I chose to do as far as this report is concerned, and I don't have a microphone here, but I think most everybody will be able to hear me. If you can't hear me, just raise your hand and I'll try to project my voice a little bit more. But I tried to, in this PowerPoint, I tried to just simply answer the questions who, what, when, where, why, and how. And any newspaper article does that. That's a good writer anyway, and that's how we're going to approach this. So the who then are the three of us that went to Cuba. And we went basically to the southwest part of Cuba, or southeast part of Cuba, and these are the three of us that went. Of course, the first one obviously is me, and the second one is Wayne Brewer. Wayne Brewer works with the Spanish ministry with the church in Mapleville, Arkansas. Wayne is fluent with Spanish, and I've been with him on numerous trips to different other places in both Mexico and Costa Rica and other places as well. Like I said, he is fluent. In fact, I think he actually has a master's degree, if I'm not mistaken, or at least a bachelor's degree in Spanish. So he is fluent in that. But we were a little bit concerned with going to Cuba because of, well, for really a number of different reasons. So we talked among ourselves, and we decided to ask Jaime Hernandez to go with us. And Jaime Hernandez is from Querétaro. And Querétaro is a city down in Mexico, close to Mexico City. It's really a large city, an ancient city. And but he's actually an employee of the phone company in Mexico. And so he doesn't do full-time preaching, but he does do some preaching. In fact, he actually comes up here to the United States sometimes and does lectures and different things like that for various lectureships. But we felt like that he would be a great asset because of cultural differences. The Mexicans, they've been able to go to Cuba, and he had friends that went to Cuba, and so it wasn't a problem for him. Well, after we got to Cuba, we were both very glad that Jaime went. We got to Cuba, and it wasn't very long, and I kept hearing Wayne go, "Huh? What did you say?" And I don't speak Spanish myself, or very little at least. I tell them, when they ask if I speak Spanish, I say I know 5 words. Uno, dos, tres, cuatro, cinco. And that's about the extent of it. But nonetheless, obviously that's a little bit of a joke. But I know a few more words than that, but I don't really know a whole lot more than that. But I kept hearing Wayne say that, and he finally said, "I am so glad Jaime has come with us because he's able to do some translation that I don't understand." They speak a different dialect or a different accent. It's like, I don't know if you've ever talked to an African. Most Africans actually do speak English. But, you know, I remember one time over in Kiev, there was an African there, and I was talking to him, and I finally said, "You know, I know you're speaking English, but I don't have a clue what you just said." And when we were over in Africa, Chris and Shell and I, there was many times I had to look to Chris and say, "Would you translate that for me?" And even though they were speaking English, so the accents, and Wayne couldn't understand them oftentimes because of that reason. But Jaime never had any trouble with it, and didn't have any trouble with the culture. We were afraid about the culture too. So Jaime was a great asset for us and with us. And Jaime's a good guy. Okay, Wayne. Okay. I think we got it now. What is the next who, what, when, where, why, and how. And the what, of course, is a mission trip, but I wanted to do more than just that. And to really give the purpose of our going, obviously it was to fulfill the Great Commission. Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not shall be condemned. And we wanted to fulfill that. Both the commission as far as teaching others, but also in teaching the lost, but also with the possibility of encouraging the brethren, which is the second point that we had there. And I'll go into that more a little bit later, but we knew that there were some brethren there, and we didn't know exactly what they believed or things about them completely. They were also unsure about us, obviously. And so anyway, we found some good brethren there. But a part of it was to strengthen and encourage the brethren there, just as Paul did on the second missionary journey that is recorded in Acts 15 and 16. Then also we wanted to learn about the needs of the church in Cuba. We figured because of where they were that there would be some needs that we would be able to help with. And we were able to help with different needs, and we'll talk about some of those needs later on. And really, a part of what we were able to do is because of what you did. If you remember the circumstance, we raised the funds that we had, but I was just about $100 short of a little bit of extra, and I got to thinking about it already cost me more than what I originally planned. And so I got to thinking about that, so I requested $100 from y'all, and you gave me $250. So we were very, very generous, and I appreciate that. But that made it possible for us to do some other things, which I'll talk about here in just a little bit. We worked with 3 men. The first one is, his name is Luis, and Luis is... he was the man that we had our original contact with. He was the local preacher for the church in Palma, Soriano, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. The second man that we worked with is a man named Raul. I don't remember his wife's name. I couldn't pronounce it, even if I remembered it was some name that I'd never heard. But nonetheless, we worked with Raul, and he's the preacher at a place called Bamba, and also in Santiago de Cuba. And then we also worked with a third fellow. His name is Pedro, Peter in English, but Pedro. And Pedro was a very good man, and we really appreciated Pedro and the things that we were able to do. In fact, if we are able to go back, and if we go back, then he will probably be the man that we work with primarily. But he was a very good man, and we appreciated him so very, very much. Now, the wind was June the 8th through the 15th. Normally, those that know me, I don't go on short mission trips. I just think about the Lord's money and the way it's used. And, a lot of the expenses are in the traveling. And so I figure if I can be in the country longer, then I can make more use of that money and that time. And so I normally extend my mission trips. In fact, this is probably the shortest one I've ever been on, other than in the States, in the actual United States. But we talked about this, and we talked very extensively about it. We didn't know what the politics would be like when we got there. We didn't know what the brethren would be like. We didn't know. We just had too many questions, and we felt like for the first trip, it needed to be a short trip so that we can make some evaluation. And so that's why we chose an 8-day trip. But here's what we did. Now, anybody that travels with me or with Wayne Brewer, because Wayne feels the same way about it that I do, that we don't sit around doing nothing. We always have time, planned for things. Now, does that mean we don't have any downtime? Well, no, of course not. We do obviously have some, but we keep it pretty busy most of the time. This idea of going and using the Lord's money and not doing anything is just, it's repulsive to me, and so we just don't do it that way. So I decided then to let you know exactly how we did our travels. On day one, our activities, on day one, I don't remember what time I left, and I'm sure it's because of where I was going, but I flew out of Springfield, and as soon as I get to the airport, suddenly there's something wrong with my ticket, and you know, the security is a problem, and passport and everything else was a problem, and so they had to work through it. And you could just imagine the security that we had to go through to get there. Well, because of the embargo that the United States placed on Cuba, and also various other factors there, but it took us a long time. Then we got to security, and they wanted to go through everything that I had. And I mean, literally, and Springfield usually is a pretty good place to fly out of. It's a little bit better than Tulsa normally. But nonetheless, because it's a small airport, but they wanted my bags open. They wanted to see this and that and the other. And so I went through security, and as soon as I got through security, the plane had already been boarded, and I was the last one down the gangplank. And as soon as I walked onto the plane, they closed the door behind me. So anyway, I got through it, but that was the beginning of the day. And we fly over to, we fly to Atlanta and then to Havana. And in Havana, it was almost a nightmare, really, quite frankly. We were told that we had to go to a different airport, so we had to get a taxi. Well, it was the same airport, just the opposite side of the airport, but we got the taxi and went around there. And you could imagine they saw Americans coming, they saw money, and they gouged us, but nonetheless, we got around there and we got in line, we did what we were told. We got to the front of the line, she said, and I'm talking about standing in line, literally standing, not sitting or waiting or anything like that, but standing in line probably half an hour, maybe even close to 45 minutes or an hour. And we get to the front and she said, "You're in the wrong line." Okay, and she said, where do we go? And she said, well, go back over that way, and didn't give us anything specific, and we were told to get in the same line again by someone else. So we stood there for a while longer, and then someone told us, no, we had to be on the other end of the airport, and we finally got over there, and wait, and the time came for the plane to leave, and we didn't leave, and we waited, and finally we were able to board the plane and go over to Santiago de Cuba. So it was a real long day, and we got there, I think it must have been around 7 o'clock in the evening. We were picked up, and everybody always talks about the old cars, old American-made cars. We were picked up in a 57 Ford. so it was kind of neat in a way. But they picked us up and took us to Soriano de Palma, where we stayed most of the time that we were there. And there we had a little, almost, they called it a hostel, like a place where students stay. But anyway, we stayed there and we ate with Louise that evening. And by the time we left Louise, it was very late. The second day, we got busy right in the work. We had a preacher's meeting in the morning, and also ate at Louise, his house, his family's house, at lunchtime. But we had 7 preachers in that meeting. Then during the afternoon, we went around visiting sisters. We visited 6 sisters. But you know, in a Hispanic culture, it's a little bit different than ours. We were asked that we would prepare short exhortations for each of these sisters. And we'd go over there and we would sit there and preach to them basically for 10, 15 minutes. And that was our short exhortation to each one. Now I know in English, in America, if we did that, you'd probably run out of the house. But that's not really all that unusual in Costa Rica. I know there have been several occasions when they invited Americans to go with them. And one of the Costa Rican preachers will stand in the corner of the living room and preach to the family. Literally just stand up and preach to them. And they don't see anything, you know, it's not odd to them. And that's basically what we did. We just tried to encourage these ladies. We took with us a bunch of clothes, as much as we could take. without having to pay a bunch of extra fees. But we took as much as we could take, and they had distributed those. In the process of visiting these sisters, we also did that. Then in the evening, we went to one of the sisters' house or apartment. She actually lived in an apartment building, and these apartments they're very similar to the apartments in the former Soviet Union. These were obviously built by the Soviets, and they were very similar to that. So we went there, and now this is a relatively small living room, and if you think about your own living room and make it a little bit smaller than that, and that's probably about the size that we're talking about. I don't know of anybody's that would be as big as or as small as theirs, but nonetheless, that's what we're talking about, 20 people inside of it. And she happened to be on the ground floor, and the end of her living room, there was a sliding glass doors. And they had one door open, and there were people outside, but there were 20 on the inside. We don't know how many were on the outside. We also know that there were some Cuban government officials that were out there and checking us out, but it didn't bother us, but we were able to preach to them. Then on the third day, that was in the evening, and then on the third day we went to visit some more sisters, and these sisters were in Baba, and then we went down to Santiago de Cuba. Now Santiago de Cuba is, and we'll have a map here in just a little bit, is the second largest city in Cuba. And I know I've heard different ones ask something about, well, that's kind of a funny name, Santiago de Cuba, Cuba. But, you know, that's really not all that unusual. Think about this. Kansas City, Kansas, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Oklahoma City in Oklahoma County in Oklahoma. So, you know, to repeat a name like that is really not all that unusual. And this what that is. It's Santiago actually means like James, or what's the Old Testament Hebrew word for James? But anyway, it's James of Cuba is what it means. And James of Cuba, Cuba. So anyway, Santiago de Cuba, and we went there to visit with some different members down there. This is Saturday afternoon, but we couldn't find anybody home, and those that we were with decided that they wanted to take us to some national monuments there, and they took us out there. Now, you know, it's the third day, second day in the country. We're not interested in souvenirs, but that's what they wanted to do, and it was full of souvenirs in different places. And I wasn't interested, and Jaime wasn't interested, and we were walking down there talking to different people. And Jaime set up a Bible study with a lady that was running one of these kiosk type things. And he said to me, he said, "You interested in having a Bible study?" "Well, yeah, I'm interested in having a Bible study." "Would you lead this Bible study?" "Well, yeah, I'll be glad to." And so we stood there, and actually the thing closed down while we were standing there, but we had a very good Bible study with her. Lasted maybe an hour, maybe a little bit more than that. But anyway, we had a very good Bible study with her. And so even though they took us to a place and we really weren't all that interested, it really turned out best. At least for us and the study. On the fourth day, okay, Russ, there. On the fourth day was Sunday, and we worshiped with the church there in Palma Soriano, and there were 36 in attendance. And I'm going to have a picture of this, and it was not during the assembly, but nonetheless, it's a picture just before the assembly. Well, again, think about a small living room, and this living room at the most 12 foot wide, probably not even that much, probably closer to about 10 foot wide, and maybe 16 foot long, but I really seriously doubt it was that big. But nonetheless, I'm just kind of throwing out numbers, and you take 36 people and put them in there. Well, we were wall-to-wall people, and there were actually some that had to stand. They were actually standing on the balcony, so it was quite full. And we know that, kind of interestingly, that there was a government official there. I didn't know this. I greeted different ones as they came in. And she sat right beside me, or right behind me. And later on, they told me who she was, but they got her picture because they took my picture. So it was kind of neat that they got her picture. But nonetheless, she checked us out and made sure that things were right and no complaints whatsoever. And then we went to Santiago de Cuba, and we went to the church that met there, and we had 18 in attendance in that particular congregation on that day. Then on Monday, we traveled to Media Luna. Now, Luna in Spanish is moon, and media means half. And so you're talking about half moon. That's what the name of the town is. And, you know, you go on any place where there's a shoreline, and there's usually a place that some type of a bay, and it's not unusual for a city to be there that's called Half Moon Bay or something like that. And I remember when I was growing up, my uncle lived at Half Moon Bay, California, just south of San Francisco. But nonetheless, that's the name that was there. And we met with the church, and there were about 20, 25 in attendance. Nobody got the exact amount, and we start trying to calculate, you know, how many was there, and we couldn't figure it out the exact number, and for whatever reason, we just didn't count that night. So I guess maybe 25 would be the preacher's count, and 20 would be the literal count. So I don't know, but anyway, somewhere between 20 and 25 in attendance at Media Luna. On the 6th day, we had a Bible study in Media Luna, and we had about 20 in attendance. It was supposed to be sort of like a private Bible study, but it didn't end up that way. But we had 20 in attendance that morning, and then we traveled back to Palma Soriano. It took us the rest of the day to do that. We left after lunch sometime and had a good lunch with the brethren then in Media Luna, and then it took us the rest of the day to go home. Then on the 7th day, we met with the church in Bamba, and this is the Wednesday before we left, and there were 18 present that particular day. Also, this would have been, if you remember the picture of the second picture, the middle picture of the man and his wife, and this would have been his daughter's husband. And I don't know why we were over to their house, but we were over there. The daughter was a member of the church, and we were over there to visit. And so I said something to the man. I said, "Have you ever had someone sit down with you to have a Bible study?" And he says, "No." I said, "Would you be interested in studying the Bible with me?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll be glad to do that and be happy to do it." And so we set up a Bible study, and that's what took place there. And there were 7 in attendance in that private Bible study. I thought there were going to be me and a translator and him, but you know, one of the things that we found out was that the local preachers really didn't know how to conduct private Bible studies. These guys were kind of pushed in the position where they were, and none of them really wanted to be there. But you know, if they were going to be a member of the church and they were going to assemble with the church, then they were forced in the position to start preaching, start leading singing, start leading prayers, things like that. And so that's how that all happened. And so they really didn't know how to conduct a private Bible study. And so then I was able to help them out a little bit in that. And then we also had an assembly in Palma Soriano, and we had 27 in that last assembly on Wednesday night. Then we traveled back the next day. We got up and left Soriano de Cuba at 4 o'clock in the morning. That's not when we got up, but that's when we left. And then I got home around 10 o'clock that night. You're talking about a long day of travel and dealing with the airport and airlines and all that kind of stuff, and then trying to also deal with other matters. But nonetheless, That's that day. So you can tell then, you know, we didn't waste our time, and we tried to keep busy the whole time that we were there. Now there's a map of Cuba. It's about 400 miles from one end of Cuba to the opposite end. If you notice that Havana's up there on the left, yeah, I'm looking at it right. So up there on the left to the top, and Santiago de Cuba is at the bottom there. And just above Santiago de Cuba, I don't know if you can read it, probably can't from where you're at, but you have Palma Soriano just above that. Media Luna is, well, come on, there it goes. There's the star right there. That's about where Media Luna is. So you can kind of see it's kind of on a half moon. So that's where that is. Notice it isn't very far to Guantanamo. And Guantanamo is where our base is, a military base. And so we're not very far away. The apartments that they lived in, or most of those that we visited lived in, were very clearly built by the Soviets. And I mean, having been to Kiev numerous times and Latvia, I mean, we've been to the Soviet Union, to different places within it, and that was the kind of housing that was there. Little bit different in that in Soviet Union it's made for cold weather. Down there in Cuba, you can imagine it has to be made for warm weather. So it was a little bit different in that way, but basically the same type of a structure. And I suspect that most likely those buildings were built for the Soviet soldiers that were there back in the 60s and the 70s, and then they turned it over to the Cuban government, and Cubans now live in those buildings. And then the why, and the why really goes back to a request. Luis, back in April of 2013, sent a letter to the 39th Street Church, and that's who that envelope is addressed to, requesting tracts. And as a result, and we're talking about the International Bible Studies tracts, or IBS tracts. These are tracts that I've had a part in writing for that particular group. And then some of them have been translated into Spanish. And so he requested these Spanish tracts. And Jack Williams, who is the preacher at the 39th Street Church in Independence, Missouri, contacted Wayne Brewer and sent him the contact information. Well, Wayne sent tracts almost immediately, but we don't know what happened to the original set of tracts. You could just imagine, there's no telling along the line where they ended up, but they didn't get to Louise. And so later on, about a year after that, he had to look for a different way to get it there, and he finally sent some tracts, some songbooks, and also some Bibles. And they did arrive, but he sent them to an organization out of Florida that had Cuban connections, and they actually wait till they fill up a container, and then they ship it somehow to Cuba. And I don't know how they do that, but nonetheless, they're able to do that. And then about that same time, when they got that material, they decided that, you know, maybe it'd be nice for them, for us to come over. And so they invited Wayne to come over, and not too long after that, Wayne asked me if I'd be interested. He has done some work in Latvia, but he knew that I had taken some Russian classes. I took 5 hours of Russian over at Oklahoma State University, and then 3 more hours of Russian over at Tulsa Community College. At that time it was called Tulsa Community College. And then I took some Russian, and Jody and I took some Russian down in Ukraine as well. So because of that reason, he felt like that we would be able to communicate maybe with some different ones, and he thought it might help us. I didn't use that much Russian. They do have Russian-made cars and different things like that over there, and able to read some of the things on the cars. Although I just spoke very little Russian to anybody, and what I spoke, most people didn't understand me anyway. So it obviously that it didn't work the way we thought it would work. I did find it interesting that in the Soviet Union there's a car called a Lada, L-A-D-A in English. And I remember one time seeing someone right in the dust of the back of the car, Lada, and they put junk. And that's pretty much true with their automobiles. But nonetheless, and I saw one of those Ladas and I thought, yeah, okay, I remember this kind of car. But nonetheless, Wayne asked me if I would be interested in going. And so we started working at it. In 2015, in December of 2015, we thought we were going to be able to go. But we kept working with the visas. And it's not the Cuban government that we had problems with, it's the United States government. And we could not get our visas, so we're not able to go. We kept working at it. And in April of 2017, this year, we finally were able to obtain our visas to go. And so then we set up a time when we went. And so that's the history behind that a little bit. Now how? Well, the way we accomplish our mission is we worked with 3 preachers and 4 churches. The 3 preachers we've already introduced you to. We've also already talked about the 4 churches, the church in Palma Soriano, the church in Bamba, the church in Santiago de Cuba, and the church in Media Luna. Those are the 4 churches that we worked with. The Raul, he was converted in Soriano de Palma, and Luis had a part in teaching him. And as soon as he was taught, it wasn't long, and Luis said, let's start a congregation out here in Bamba. And so they started one out there, and Raul preached out there, and then Raul's family, most of them were in Santiago de Cuba, and Raul then taught his family, and that's where the congregation down there came from. Now, all these congregations are not very big. They're none of them very big because they're limited in size, because the government will not let them, or they're not permitted to own buildings. And so they're limited in size into what you can get to a single apartment. And even though we had 37 in that one apartment, but that's not normal. Obviously, you wouldn't want to be crowded into a hot building like that every week after week. And so in Media Luna, there were actually 2 congregations that we know of. And Pedro told us that every major city in Cuba has a church. He didn't know all the details, but they're all small, and they all meet in houses, every single one of them. But that's not only true with reference to the Lord's church, it's true with reference to all the churches as far as the denominational world, sectarian world is concerned, except for the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church did have big buildings and different things like that. In fact, we were on the airplane with a Catholic priest out of Rome, and he didn't reveal who he was at first, but in the conversation he finally admitted that he was a Catholic priest, and he was over Cuba and different parts of Mexico, Hispanic Catholic churches. But nonetheless, that was how we worked at it. And because of government regulations, we were limited in the way that we spoke. Not limited so much in what we spoke, but we were limited in the way we spoke. We didn't know what kind of visa to get. We got a visitor's visa, and one day we were investigated and had a long conversation with a Cuban official and a immigration officer, and he was very polite, a gentleman the whole time. And he found out that we weren't really there to upset the government or anything like that. And I made sure that he understood that we were there, that we believed in 1 Peter chapter 2, that we were to obey all the laws of the land, and that we were not going to disobey them, at least not knowingly disobey them. And it kind of settled him down a little bit. But nonetheless, he then, because I mean, you know, he's trying to help us out too. And so he told us the kind of visa that we need to get, and that's a religious visa. So if we go back, we're going to try to get a religious visa and to be able to speak a little bit differently. But the type of visa that we had, we were not allowed to stand up to speak. I could not do what I'm doing right now. We had to sit down, and he was very clear that we had to sit to preach or to teach, and it really should be a discussion, he said. And so we just started adding some questions in it. We just didn't give time for people to answer. So we kind of had a sort of a discussion, and so, but we did preach the Word. But he did not in any way tell us that we could not preach the Bible. We made it very clear that we believed in the Bible and that we were only going to preach the Bible and not a bunch of politics and things. And so we just kept it like that. So we were limited in that way, but we were not limited in other ways, as far as we know. We did try to hand out some tracts one day, and the local preachers said, "Oh, we can't do that," and so we were limited that way. But we were able to talk to some people about it. Then we were able to teach both the Bible, both publicly and privately, which I'll give you some photos here in just a second that point that out. And then also, we were able to help the brethren with benevolence, both with clothes and in a monetary way. Most of the ladies, well, they're very, very poor. I mean, you take the poorest of those in the United States, we're rich compared to them. And they just didn't have hardly anything. And the government regulates that to some degree or another. And so we were able to help them in monetary ways with the clothes and then leave a little bit. And when I say a little bit, I'm talking about like $5. And they thought they were in hog heaven. And so, you know, with just a little bit of money like that, because it's a lot of money to them. And even though, I mean, who among us really think about $5? I mean, you know, I don't think we go out frivolously and just spend it, but at the same time, we don't think too much about $5 bills. Well, publicly, we were able to preach in these different places. This is the photo of the church in Palma, Soriano. You can't really see it very well. Well, that's really a good picture compared to what was on my projector this morning. But anyway, I took this picture. Some guys, they'll take pictures during the assembly itself and get up in front and then take the picture. That just bugs me to no end, so I don't do that. And so anyway, this was a picture before the assembly, and not everybody's there. This is the assembly that we had 37. Now you can imagine that little tiny room. There were people out there on the balcony. That door leads out to the balcony. This is like on the 3rd or 4th floor. I don't remember which it is. So we're pretty high up, and all these people had to climb the stairs to get there. No elevators, nothing like that. We had to all climb the stairs, go in there, and then they had these chairs. They had to take the normal living room furnishing out, and then we were in there. The second photo is the church in Santiago de Cuba, and this is after the services were over. They hung around and we took this particular picture. In both of these pictures there were visitors, and we didn't know the visitors from the members really. Some of them we of course were able to talk to, but some of them we weren't. But nonetheless, that's the church there in Santiago de Cuba. Then this is a picture of the church in Media Luna. If you notice, this thing at the very front of the picture is the pulpit that they had. They had 2 rooms there basically opened up together. But we spoke from the other side, and notice that Wayne is sitting down. I'll have an enlargement of that here in just a second. But that's Media Luna. And this is the sisters, and they're only sisters that meet in the church in Bamba, and those are the sisters that meet there. And they meet out behind this house. There's a little fire ring out there, and that's where they meet, around that little fire ring. And obviously used for cooking and things like that. They don't really need the heat, so it's used for cooking. And then here's Wayne, and that's just an enlargement of the other photo, but you can see him sitting there. And I don't know exactly what had happened here. I don't remember. I had been teaching that class earlier, and then I got up to do something and ended up at the back of the group, and then took his picture when he was teaching by himself. But notice that he is sitting down doing some teaching. It seems like after I got done with my lesson, I had to go back to the back there for whatever reason, and somebody asked Wayne a question, and Wayne was actually answering a Bible question. Here's a couple of pictures of a private Bible studies, or two private Bible studies. Notice that in the left photo there are several people around and looking and watching after the Bible study. In the right photo, this is with the man that was Raul's son-in-law, that I had set it up. And we simply opened the Bible, and I was writing some things. I can write some words in Spanish, and I was writing some things to illustrate different points and left it with them. Like I said, the local preachers, they really didn't know, anything about Bible studies, and so they were, I was really surprised. Here his wife was over there, and that's the sister, the one in the orange there. She was taking notes. You can't see behind to the right of the photo. Raul and his wife were there, and they were taking notes, following along very closely to the way I conducted the Bible study. And then Louise was over there also, and then right behind Jaime was Wayne. And sometimes Jaime speaks pretty good English. His wife and his daughters, he has two daughters, and they speak very, very good English. But Jaime does a fair job. But sometimes, you have accents to deal with, and he doesn't always, he hasn't been around me a lot, although he has translated for me before. But he had to sometimes stop and say, "Wayne, what did he just say?" So anyway, but we were able to get through the study that way. Well, one of the things that we found out was that they needed songbooks, especially in Media Luna. We found out they were using a denominational songbook, actually a Presbyterian songbook, and we asked him, said, if you could get a different songbook, are you interested in it? He said, "Oh yeah." He said, "This is a horrible songbook. We need something else." And he said, "Just a minute." And he walks over to another room, and he comes out, and he has this old battered songbook. It had tape all over it, and I'm talking about like masking tape and like a gray tape. And it was clearly falling apart. And it was the songbook that most Hispanic brethren use. And he said, "I would just love to have this songbook." Well, because of what we were able to do, and because some brethren like you said, "We don't want to help you with $100, we want to do more," then I had a little bit of surplus, and I was able to send $500 to Wayne to purchase songbooks. Now, Wayne is in possession of those, and we're just looking for the most economic way to get it to them and the best way to get it to them, because we don't want it lost between here and there, obviously. And so we're just in the process of getting that done. But that's because of the generosity of brethren like you. And of all the different things that that a person needs for worship, obviously they have Bibles, and they don't have any problems with that. But of all the things you really need is a songbook. And so it was because of generosity of folks like you that we were able to buy those songbooks. Well, it all began with a letter. And to me, this is just almost mind-boggling. It was only a letter requesting tracts, and that's where it all began. But because of the generosity of folks, we were able to travel there, and we are so grateful to you. this is close to San Diego to Cuba, and is actually looking over the, it's on the south end of Cuba, so it's looking over the, not the Mediterranean, the, not the Caspian. What is that sea down there called? Caribbean. Thank you. The Caribbean or Caribbean Sea. And so anyway, very, very beautiful sea. But we were there, and we appreciate so much the help. Now I know that I've taken more time than I should have, but hopefully this will get you caught up on what we did, and we do appreciate what you did. I want to offer the invitation. There may be somebody that have a question afterwards, and after the invitation, if you would like me to get back up here and ask some questions, I'll be glad to answer any questions I can. I do request that we keep away from the politics. I don't want to say anything or do anything that might upset the government down there and be opposed to the brethren down there. There are some good brethren, and I don't want to make any hardships for them. So stay away from the politics, but I'll be glad to answer any questions you have after the invitation. If there's someone here, I think everybody that at least I know that are old enough to be Christians are Christians. And so if there's somebody here that need the prayers of the church or need prayers for forgiveness or prayers for other reasons, then the invitation is extended as together we stand and sing to encourage you.